Newport Beach police identify a suspect in the killing of an Irvine mother more than 40 years ago. Investigators believe a man who died in 1999 is the person responsible for the killing of 42-year-old Judy Nesbit on November 26, 1980.
A mother was stolen from her kids, and a husband lost his wife just before Thanksgiving in 1980. A newspaper advert published by the Nesbit family planted the seed that resulted in a confusing murder of an Irvine homemaker. What was the reason for her to be murdered in cold blood? Why did it take so long for them to solve the case? Hi, and welcome back to Mysterious Hook. Today, we're going to look at the 41-year-old cold case of Judy Nesbit. It's a case that haunted the Newport Police Department for over 4 decades. So, let's dive right into the mystery without any further ado. The victim in this case was around the same age as the case itself when it was solved. Judith Conklin was born in 1938 in North Hollywood, California. Judy, as most people called her, met Fred Nesbit on a blind date. Fred, in those days, worked as a lifeguard at Newport Beach, and Judy was a bright student who belonged to a tight-knit North Hollywood family. It was love at first sight, which led to a marriage a year later. Fred and Judy would go on to have 4 kids together. They weren't wealthy, but they were happy. In 1972, the family relocated to Irvine, California, where Fred landed a job at the Paul Monroe Hydraulics of Whittier. He quickly climbed the ranks and was eventually promoted to vice president of sales. Judy decided to stay home with the kids. She dedicated her life to the family. The family was very close. Their weekends were filled with an active outdoor life, most of which they spent on their yacht, called Felicidad 4, a 36-foot-long cabin cruiser. This was their home away from home. The family had had the boat for a long time. They recall cruising the ocean with the children on deck. Felicidad is a Spanish word that translates to happiness, but tragically, that is where their happiness was stripped away. November 26, 1980. It was 9:30 in the morning when the phone rang. As Judy's son recalls, the Nesbits had recently posted an ad in the local newspaper. They had decided to sell their yacht. There was a potential buyer on the other end of the line who wanted to come over and take a look at the boat. They set up a meeting at the Marina Dunes Yacht Anchorage in Newport Beach later in the afternoon. Judy left the house at around 12:30 to meet the potential buyer at 1 p.m. That was the last time she was seen alive. The children were home, enjoying the Thanksgiving break. As the sun began setting, their oldest son, Steve, who was 20 years old at the time, was by now a bit worried. It was 7 p.m. when Fred made it back home. By then, Judy had been gone for more than 6 hours. He knew it wasn't like her to be gone for so long. Worried, he headed down to the marina to look for her. Fred thought maybe Judy might have stopped somewhere to pick up a few things, or maybe she wanted to spend some time on the boat before they sold it. Felicidad 4 did pack a lot of memories for the family, and letting it go must have been hard for her. Fred walked down to the boat, but the door was locked. Fred unlocked the door and entered. He then headed towards the front of the boat. He found her there in the sleeping quarters, but to his horror, she was sprawled on the floor, covered in blood. She was motionless and unresponsive. Fred frantically tried to feel for her pulse. His own pulse was racing. He could not tell if it was already too late or if she still had a chance. He screamed at the top of his lungs, and thankfully, someone heard him. They called an ambulance, but it was, in fact, too late. The post-mortem report said that she had been violently attacked. There were signs that she was struck in the head 3 times with a heavy blunt object. There were signs of a struggle. As the detectives visualized the events, it was apparent that Judy had fought for her life, but her efforts to get away from her attacker were thwarted when he pulled out a small caliber gun and shot her in the head point blank. The only things that were missing were Judy's credit cards, checkbook, and some cash. The yacht was not looted, possibly because the attacker needed to flee quickly after the murder. Judy had no signs of sexual assault. The authorities went with the theory that it was a deal gone wrong. That seemed to be the most plausible scenario. Presumably, there had been some sort of argument about the selling of the yacht, which triggered the assault and subsequent murder. They started questioning residents and people who were present in the area during the time of the attack. The suspect wasn't exactly as covert as he should have been. Police were able to get a detailed sketch of the murderer from eyewitnesses. Several people saw the potential buyer, and according to Ruth Mills, a woman who owned a boat docked near Felicidad 4, she claimed to have seen the man up close. That day, she had called in a maintenance worker at noon to work on her boat. She mistook the suspect for the serviceman and talked to him for a while, inquiring if he was the man appointed to service her boat. The man said no, as he waited for Judy at Newport Beach. She even saw Judy walk over to him and then walk to the boat together. Ruth was a prime witness, as she even heard someone screaming. But she didn't think too much about it until she heard the screaming again, followed by a loud sound, which sounded like a gunshot. She wasn't the only one who heard it. There were many people in the area that day, and the bay was filled with yachts. There was no way to know where the screams came from. No one alerted the police, and no one suspected that what they heard was someone being murdered. Ruth spotted the suspect walking towards the parking lot and then, shortly after, returning to Felicidad 4. He was calm and nonchalant enough not to raise any concerns. He left shortly after. Everyone knew that had to have been the man who killed Judy. Police took Ruth in to help create a sketch of the suspect. He was described as a white man in his mid-30s with a medium build. He was wearing a pair of aviator sunglasses, a tan jacket, and brown trousers. He was well-groomed with neat short hair. Unfortunately, it was a description that matched a lot of people in the area. Many people submitted tips based on the sketch, but none turned out to be fruitful. Police had gathered evidence and fingerprints from the crime scene, but unfortunately, that would not be very useful either. The Nesbitt family had hosted a party on the yacht shortly before the incident, so there were several sets of fingerprints on the boat. The main evidence they had was an unidentified brown hair. Police went on to investigate Judy's background and questioned Fred's colleagues. Everything checked out, and the Nesbitts had maintained a good reputation in the neighborhood and had no enemies. Police continued flipping through the case files to see if there were any similar incidents. From there, they zeroed in on a so-called want ad rapist who had been notorious in the San Francisco area. There were about 6 cases that were almost identical to this one. A man had raped women after making appointments with them to show him boats for sale, but none of them were killed. And of course, Judy had not been raped. This lead seemed to be promising, yet when he was called in for questioning, he had an airtight alibi proving that he was nowhere near Newport Beach when the crime took place. He was ruled out as a suspect. The case was going nowhere, and all leads led to dead ends. With more than 200 cases of unsolved murders in Orange County, the Judy Nesbit case was just one of many. Yet, the police never gave up, nor did the Nesbit family. In 2002, investigators obtained DNA from the root of the hair. This was entered into the FBI database, but unfortunately, the DNA didn't match anyone. Yet again, they were at a dead end. The evidence was locked up and assigned a case number among many others. 16 years later, in 2018, the DNA was sent out for processing again, this time using brand new techniques and technology. Green Laboratories began processing the DNA using a new extraction technique to expand the DNA profile. This case would go down in history as the first case that used this technology to identify a murderer in the United States. Finally, there was a match. The Newport police finally closed the case after 41 years on the 9th of August, 2021. They had the name of the man who had evaded justice for 38 years. They eventually identified the murderer as Kenneth Elwin Marks. through genetic genealogy. The man who responded to the ad and the man who Ruth Mills mistook for a serviceman 4 decades ago. Unfortunately, they were 22 years late. In April 1999, Kenneth Elwin Marks passed away after a long battle with cancer. He was seemingly a normal guy, according to those who knew him. No one would have thought that this man would have been involved in the gruesome murder of Judy 19 years earlier. He was only 44 years old when he was buried at the Thomas Cemetery in Bridgeport, Texas. We will never know what really happened that day, or why anyone would take the life of a mother and wife just before Thanksgiving, a holiday that symbolizes family togetherness. Judy Nesbit was a loving wife and mother who was violently and senselessly ripped from her family. Identifying her killer was all the more bittersweet after learning he would never face justice. At least, not here on Earth. Newport Beach Police Chief John T. Lewis was quoted as saying, "This is a case that has hung heavy in the hearts of our community, our department, and the Nesbit family." He added, "Kenneth Marks has passed away, but he no longer gets to hold the secret of his deeds." Through incredible advances in technology and the tireless dedication of these investigators, we now have some closure for all who knew and loved Judy Nesbit. Do you think this is a case of deal gone wrong? Do you think Fred would have faced the same fate had he gone instead of Judy to finalize the deal? We would love to know your take on this case. Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to us for more mysterious content like this. Stay safe, friends. Until next time.